Welcome everyone to today's OHS Canada webinar on hand safety in construction, being held in partnership with our friends at Superior Glove. I'm Todd Humber, the Senior Editor for OHS Canada. We're privileged today to have with us Ian Lampher, a hand safety specialist with Superior Glove. But before we begin, just a couple of housekeeping notes. You, the audience, are in listen-only mode. That means we cannot hear you, we can't see you either, but we definitely want to hear from you. We have reserved some time at the end of today's session for a special Q&A with Ian. It's your chance to get your questions fielded by an expert. You can enter those questions anytime using the question box that's located on the bottom of your Zoom webinar control panel. This webinar is also being recorded. You will receive a copy of it directly from Superior Glove in the next 48 hours, so look for that. And now, Ian, over to the star of our show. I'm happy to hand the microphone to you and take it away.
All right, thank you very much. I appreciate it, Todd, and welcome everyone. I thank you all for joining us today. During our discussion, we're going to discuss how we're working with contractors to improve the safety culture within the construction industry. So our discussion today applies to the construction industry, but I think you'll find that it can be applicable to just about any industry that has a prime or general contractor scenario that also deals with trade partners or subcontractors in that situation. So there's always ways to figure out how to work more effectively together. A little bit about my background. Prior to Superior Glove, I spent a decade in the construction world. I actually worked on projects designing building envelope systems to keep water out of buildings. And I would do everything from write specs to do the detailed drawings, to run pre-bid meetings, pre-construction meetings, all the way to project managing jobs from conception through to completion. So I've seen the gambit of what can happen on a construction site and all the different moving parts that go into that, from the general contractor to the architect, to the building, the owner. So there's a lot of moving parts, and, you know, helping to change the culture as it comes, you know, as it relates to safety is very, very important because of what we've seen going on in the industry. So right here before we get started, you know, our owners, let me introduce our company a little bit here. We've been doing this for over 100 years, since 1910. And Tony and Joe Gang, pictured here above, are the brothers whose dad bought Superior in 1961, and they built a family-owned company. And it's been operated with Joe and Tony, now managing the day-to-day operations. Joe leads the sales and marketing, while Tony heads up product development. In the hand safety industry, we're known for being a lead innovator. We have a large and active in-house research and development team that is constantly looking for ways to improve our hand protection and make it more effective and more comfortable. We're also lucky to have 4 manufacturing plants that we own and operate in Ontario, Newfoundland, Canada, as well as Honduras. So when we touch on some things here, you know, one of the things as a lead innovator, we have a glove for just about every hazardous situation you can imagine. And this slide right here, it's a great representation of the types of hazards that workers face daily on the job sites. Our mission as a company for solving hand safety problems has led us to develop that industry's largest hand protection offering. We actually develop 40 to 50 new products per year, trying to fill gaps in the marketplace that we find. And in construction, as we go out there and spend time on job sites, we look to not only just uncover ways to help, you know, protect with what we have, but also look for gaps in that industry where we can maybe provide some solutions that make sense and nobody's been able to come up with yet. You know, before we get going though, I want to, you know, touch base with you on some of the data that's out there that we see. You know, some of the trends that we've seen both in the US and Canadian markets. I mean, right here, Canadian construction employs 1.4 million people. And before we get into our approach to changing that culture, I think it's important to take a look at the current state of the industry and the many challenges we face in turning that ship around. You know, here's some statistics from the Canadian construction market. I mean, $141 billion annual revenue. And in 2019, there were 900 deaths in construction. In 2018, 7,915 time loss claims. That's a lot of a lot of folks out of work with injuries. And that represents over 7% of your population. So it's really important that we, start to take care of that percentage of the population. In the US construction market, we have 740,000 contractors and employers with 7.6 million workers. One of the stats that stuck out to me is that 1 in 5 work-related deaths occurs in construction. And even scarier is that 25% or more workers didn't even bother to report an injury. That's a loss of $170 billion a year in injury costs alone. More importantly, the injuries and the deaths that we can, start to improve upon and start to reduce is a great way to take a look at some of this data and say, what are we doing and what can we do to improve? Oh, sorry about that. Skipped ahead here. So given some of the big picture injury stats we just looked at, we need to take a look at some of the obstacles we're facing that are causing this. Why are we not protecting our hands? Well, some of these are pretty obvious. The physical barriers, the gloves aren't comfortable. They're not, they're not able to perform their tasks. Some of the other barriers, availability, it's not provided by the contractor, not provided by my employer. It's inconvenient. But I think something that we need to look at is that we already have a shortage of skilled trades labor in the industry. I think that's apparent when you look at the amount of, workers that are lacking for the jobs that we have. And if we don't protect them properly, are we going to keep those workers? More importantly, you have new people come into the trade. And what happens when they see somebody have a serious injury? Right away, they might think, what? Do I really want to do this? I can make money. I can make a living doing something else. So it's imperative that we really work to protect people on the job. And if we're going to attract new people to the industries, we really have to focus on making sure that new people come and new people stay, because the trend shows that the higher rate of injuries tend to be among those in the first few years of their trade, as an apprentice or a new worker. And if we want to keep them, we need to protect them. And I really think that comes down to changing the culture and creating one where it's safety centric, it's focused on reducing hazards and, shifting that culture. That leads us into a poll question. Given the data that we shared, I wanted to throw something out there to you and see, in the last couple of years, how many reportable hand injuries or close calls have you had within your company? And we'll leave that up there for a second. Has everyone had a chance to participate in that? And we'll kind of review those results here. Take a peek. Wow. So it is kind of, pretty spread out. It's generally what I see. 17% had more than 15 hand injuries, 11%, 10 to 15, 40%, 5 to 10, and 0 to 5, 33%. So it is pretty spread out. And I will tell you, I do spend a lot of time on construction sites, and this is consistent with the conversations that I see. But I think what we have to do is really take a look at where's that coming from, and in order to change that culture, we first need to take a look at how we've traditionally procured our safety products. and how this short-sightedness might actually be counterproductive to our goals. So in this slide, one of the things, this comes from a lot of conversations I've had and a lot of research we've had out there with safety professionals and safety directors from large general contractors. In this slide, you can see the shortfalls of the way we've traditionally procured PPE. This approach leads to a cost-focused approach rather than a hazard-centric focus. A lot of times you have a distributor or manufacturer's rep visiting a site. They connect with, as it says, one of the trade supervisors or one of the tradespeople, and they're looking to cross over a glove. And I get that request a lot. Let me cross this over, looking to cut costs to meet a budget. So a lot of times what you have to do, thinking, well, maybe this is our in and maybe this is how we start a conversation, we quote on that crossover without even seeing the hazard. And one of the things I've discovered is by doing that, we're not even looking at the real hazard. We're quoting on a glove, or we're quoting on a piece of PPE that may not even be the right solution for that task. And we start this repetitive cycle of maybe maybe it'll lead to a bigger conversation, but generally it just leads to a conversation about, well, can I get it cheaper? And I have an old saying that I heard a long time ago. I've never heard the words quality and cheap used in the same sentence. And it really, by focusing on cost, it takes us away from, are we using the right solution? Are we using the right form of PPE for this actual task? And really what we as manufacturers and distributors have been taught is to sell to the industry the way that they've wanted us to. So that comes with changing that culture. Let's look at what we already know and ask ourselves, why are we still not seeing the trends in injury reductions we want to or expect to see? So now more than ever, gloves are being worn in construction. I've seen that firsthand. I'm sure you've all seen that. They're being worn by all the different trades. And I think we can all agree that technologies are constantly improving to make gloves more dexterous and durable. Yet, knowing all that information, knowing that we're actually, getting more people to wear gloves, getting better technology, why are we not seeing that same ratio and that same trend in the decrease of injuries? We're doing the same things over and over again, expecting a different result. And I think the procurement slide and how we base that is really a good representation of where we're coming short on that. We're selling to the construction market the exact way that we've been programmed to. So we need to think outside the box. And how do we really change the safety culture and have that discussion to reduce construction hand injuries? More importantly, why is it challenging? They'll influence others to really have better results. The higher rate of injuries tends to be among those first few years, like we said. If we want to keep people long-term, we need to really focus on changing that culture. As you can see here, why is it so challenging? Well, construction has second highest rate of hand injuries. One of the things that I've seen and heard is that we need to communicate better with the trade partners. A lot of times the trade partners take their cues and they take their lead from those general contractors on what's expected. So by creating clear messaging in clear goals, I think it's a lot easier to get to those results. So how do we create a culture focused on application-centric approaches to providing hand safety? One of the biggest challenges that I've seen and that we've discovered in our work with various prime contractors is the use of very vague language in their safety and specification plans. In the construction world, we all know that the spec is really what everyone is held to account to on a job site. But when we leave things open to interpretation, that's when things can fall short. Here's a great example of real world example of contractual language. When I saw this, there were so many challenges with this. one of the things that it states is that, 100% EN level Cut 4 resistant gloves or task specific gloves according to the SDS. The challenge with that language, if I'm reading that, and I spent a lot of years reading specs, is it's referring to the European standard, and in the US and Canada, we use the ANSI North American standard. The other part it refers to is according to the SDS, a safety data sheet, which is a chemical data sheet. So if someone is basically reading that, it could say and be interpreted that I only need to wear gloves when I'm handling chemicals. Here's a safety plan, just a quick reference to Cut 4 safety gloves. So if this is what's going out from the prime contractors to the subcontractors and the trade partners, how are they expected to really meet the standards when the standards aren't clear? I think that's where we need to start, having standards. Where, everything starts with having standards and taking a hazard-centric approach to identifying the right solution for the task and really focusing on the hazard. Understanding the ANSI standard is a great place to start. This is a great one-page, that standard highlight that you can use in the field when you're working with your trade partners, when you're training, your safety people in the field, talking to them about all those standards. And this is something that I'm sure, we'll be providing out to you that you can use, but understanding where these hazards are. A lot of times I've asked this question when I go onto a site. Sometimes I see Cut 4s is, well, this is our standard. And I ask the question, how did you come upon that standard? And there was really no good explanation. In fact, one person actually just said, well, it was kind of in the middle. So we felt that was probably the best place to start. So that tells us that no one was actually looking at the hazard. It was, where should we start to just kind of maybe blanketly cover everything? And again, leaves room to interpretation. So where does this start? Well, the ANSI standards is a great place to start. But one of the things that, our owner, Joe Gang, took upon himself was to really take a deeper dive at this. And he realized that throwing gloves at a problem without taking a deeper dive isn't always the answer. And so, as surprising as this may sound for a glove company, we don't see PPE as the silver bullet solution for reducing hand injuries. And as Joe, our owner, as you see here pictured, wrote a book on, rethinking hand safety. And to drive that point home, he saw so many companies struggling to reduce, injuries despite the plentiful amount of PPE. And this book isn't about PPE. Instead, it really focuses on practical ways that real safety managers have reduced hand injuries at their company by 50, even 90%. It provides practical ways to get the workers to willingly change their behavior and shift the safety culture. And it's based on things that real safety managers have had success implementing. So there's a lot of real case study stuff in this book and a lot of valuable information. We see the challenges, it's about so much more than just wearing gloves. It is about the culture. If you want a copy, we'll send out a link to our website. You can download a free copy of this book. I've had multiple conversations with safety managers and safety directors out there who've read this book, and it's been a real eye-opener for them. And it's a great place that we can actually, when we go on site, when I work with them, it's a great starting point for that conversation that we found. And everyone's really on the same page, working towards the same goal once they spend time with that. So one of the things in the book really talks about the hierarchy of safety controls. If we're able to address, other factors prior to addressing PPE, we see fewer and less severe injuries, lower injury costs, more productive workers due to less downtime and the ability to, be on the job, the ability to use lighter duty gloves that are less, inhibitive, better morale with your workers. So what we really do is we're taking this hierarchy of safety controls approach, let's eliminate a hazard. Let's substitute or replace, the hazard. We try to engineer things out. PPE is really your last line of defense. And one of the things that we developed from that book, and one of the things that kept coming up was, how do we take that a step further? And from the book, what we were able to do was devise an assessment tool that takes an application-centric approach, and it sticks to the principles and philosophies of that book. Sometimes an outside perspective can actually validate views and messages even more effectively. To further validate that approach, we were able to partner with some large general contractors in the construction companies to take a consultative approach and to devise a tool that can be used in construction. The construction hand safety guide was devised using one-on-one meetings with hand safety specialists and folks like myself, and the recommendations that we did were based on real operations and data from the industry, not safety opinions. We wanted to really tighten our bind with the trades by showing them that we also had a lot to learn, and hand safety from about the hand safety from their experts. Well, we can utilize a tool to create a better working environment, and that tool we created was called the Hand Safety Program, an HSP, where what we do is we go in, we work with companies and offer that same support and help them understand what they're currently doing, how their current gloves are being utilized, and how they're performing, and also make any recommendations that match the hazard, and try and make recommendations that might remove some hazards or engineer some safety protocols around hazards, but really educate the trade partners and worker about some of the myths that come along with safety. Like I said, we partnered with many leaders, industry leaders, in this approach to becoming a true partner in evolving their safety culture and gathering essential information that's really helped us to really take a lead in how do we reduce hand injuries by really taking a hazard-centric focus. Some of our partners who've been able to benefit from this, companies like Gilbane, Leadcore, Turner Construction, DPR, we've been going on their sites and really working with their safety teams, taking this approach. And it's benefited in reduced injuries, better compliance, increased knowledge with their trade partners, and I think it's really helped to create a true partnership so that everyone sees that they're on the right approach to really reducing injuries and cared about the guys going home at night, and the folks going home at night that can sleep better without having to worry about being injured or their jobs. So conducting a third-party on-site hazard assessment has been found to garner information that can help offer insight into non-compliance and the potential causes to higher rates of incidents. It also sometimes found that workers will open up more to a third party if they feel it won't affect them on the job as to what they may say. This approach really can sometimes detect underlying factors as to why there is non-compliance. I can share with you, I've had that experience going on to sites where just talking to some of the workers, and they feel that, oh, I'm not with the company. I'm just here to just kind of take a look at things, observe, and collect some information so that, we might be able to make some recommendations to make their life easier. You're really surprised at how workers open up to you about some of the things that they may not. And it really has really opened up some great lines of communication. And one of the things I've found is it's been able to help build a stronger relationship with the safety team and their people when they know these underlying factors. And we're able to kind of be that third party that provides that insight and that conduit for them to share that information. So how do we get all the stakeholders to the table? taking a look at the complete picture allows for open conversation. That's the best way to reduce these injuries and to change the safety culture. As companies are looking to reduce costs, it's important to factor all of the data in and look at the overall costs. So one of the things that we do when we put a hand safety program together and we're working with contractors is we look at the data. It's not just about, hey, what glove are you using? Let's look at, what's the cost savings from reduced downtime, human pain and suffering, how much is this, costing workers to be out? Are there ways that you're, reducing injuries and in helping to train workers to, come back to work in a safer fashion? So we really want to take a look at the complete picture. And I think by doing that, it really allows everyone to have a clear, concise view of where to go. What we've learned along the way with our contractor partners during this hand assessment is essentially that the cost of hand injuries, while we understand that the cost analysis can be somewhat subjective, it was important to attempt to quantify those costs of the hand injuries, not only to the worker's employer, but to the general contractor. We understand the general contractor is holding a lot of the liability. We include the injury time, first aid equipment, investigation time. We talk about taking a look at the cost of the first aid. Knowing this helps factor in how best to tackle it. The cost of the medical. I'll give you a great example. I sat with a contractor and we were talking about this and going through some of the numbers and not just saying, hey, what do you pay for gloves? We were really talking about, hey, what is your overall cost for injuries? What have you had a chance to break that down? And I had one safety director looked at me and goes, I've been able to actually break it down to what it costs me for a person to go out there and get one stitch. And my first thought was, how many people get one stitch if you get injured on the job? And he chuckled because he's like, yeah, you're exactly right. But he factored with lost labor, everything that goes into it. It's about $4,000 per stitch where he is. So I said, listen, what's the average? He goes, people are getting an average of 4 stitches. So I said, you're telling me he goes, yeah, it's about $16,000. And he beat me to it because he immediately looked at me and said, that's a lot of gloves, isn't it? I said, yeah, that is a lot of gloves. So we really kind of take a look at those types of things and really break that down and do a deep dive into the data. Oh, sorry about that. Keep spinning here me. So, when we partner with contractors to reduce injuries and help change their safety culture, we utilize multiple tools stemming from Joe's book, Rethinking Hand Safety. It's great for behavioral guidance and it helps us work with safety managers to get on the same page. Like I said, we utilize a construction hand safety guide. We meet one-on-one, with the safety team. We go out there, we visit the site, we spend time, walking the site, talking to those doing the work, getting feedback from them. And, we've utilized this approach to really gather as much on-site information and in some instances be able to develop customized glove matrices for some of these large general contractors that they now can turn into toolbox talks, safety approaches. And we'll touch on that. The hand safety guide, which you guys can all have access to, and we'll send that out, is a great tool to just say, hey, listen, we want to see where we're at. Let's take a look at where we're at, where we're going. Are we on the right track? And there's a lot of great information in there from, exercises, toolbox talks, how to generate some training for your folks in the field. But, this allows them to have this resource and really utilize that to go out there and start to make some changes within the organization. Taking that a step further, we're able to go on site if companies want and say, hey, listen, we'd like to kind of take a deeper dive, what's involved in a hand safety program. Well, we can go on, look at the injury stats, get feedback from the safety professionals and the trade partners and their safety teams, observe the applications of the many trades and tasks along with their hazards. At the same time, we get feedback and input from those on the ground wearing and using the current PPE. Then what we do, we can compile recommendations, put a report together with some recommendations, but it doesn't end there. Then we, much like what we did with our other trade partners to devise this, we implement a 2-week trial for the gloves that are recommended that we observe with each trade. Try to find consistencies, try to find irregularities, get feedback from the field. Let's see if we're on the right track. If we are, great. If not, where do we need to turn? Where do we need to pivot to? But really, it's not of a cost to another company, because our goal is to really, as I said, change the culture. And you can't change the culture just by throwing gloves at something. It's really taking a look at it and say, are we on the right track with what we're doing? And do we need to implement not only just the right PPE, but how do we come up with some better safety guidelines? Good example here, on one of my walks, I was able to uncover this company was using this metal strip around these huge giant intake fans. These intake fans were about 25 square feet in diameter. So they were having to clean these on a daily basis, and told me that when we hand this over to the owner, they're going to have to clean this on a daily basis. And I kept looking at these strips of metal, and there was like metal burrs everywhere. And my first question was, is this something you fabricate on site? Or do you have a fab shop on site? They said, no, we actually buy this and, from a company, they ship it in. And I said, well, can you grind this down? Or better yet, can the company grind that down? And nobody had the answer. And the safety director said, you know what? I'm going to give him a call. He goes, because I'm curious about that. So he called me a week later while I was compiling the report and said, Ian, you're never going to believe this. He goes, I called that company, and come to find out, I asked him, I said, those pieces of metal that were near the intake fans, they have a ton of burrs on them. Is that something you guys could grind down? And the response was, well, yeah, we do that for anyone that asks. And the next question was, well, what's it going to cost us? And the company said, nothing. We do that for anyone that asks. So it really came down to asking the right questions. And we're able to remove that hazard. Does that remove the need for a glove? Not necessarily, because of all the other hazards, but we're able to kind of, by spending time on a job site, remove hazards and really, make things a lot easier for the owner when this building's turned over. So the on-site HSP follows that hierarchy of safety controls philosophy, like we just kind of hit on. Oftentimes, like I said, we're able to point out ways to remove a hazard before we even discuss proper PPE. And then with this approach, we partner with the general contractor or with those contractors to design a company-specific matrix, as well as gather important data into one report that will help create a broad view of ways that you can improve safety as well as reduce costs. This is an ongoing partnership, and we understand it. Things change, and there's never changing landscape in construction. So we want to be there to change and adapt with you. Our goal is to change culture. And in order to do that, we have to constantly be, involved in those discussions and not just, say, hey, well, we solved this problem and then, walk away from it. We want to see that we're getting results. And that can only be done by thinking outside the box and not doing the same thing over and over again. And I think if we look at it, the same thing that I'm talking about is the same reaction I get. Hey, send me this glove. I want to try this glove, or send me this, versus actually putting eyes on something and really getting some feedback from people who, not only are we looking at this every day on a job site, but we understand the technologies in our field and the technologies in our industry and what solutions might best work for those applications. And that here's just an example of that matrix, and it's an interactive feature that when we design it, we've been able to design it for some companies in a PDF format so that they actually just hover over the image, click on it based on what trade they're dealing with, and it takes them to a spec sheet. So it's something that their safety teams out in the field on multiple different job sites, and let's face it, we understand construction is not a static job site. They just continue to move. They can take this information with them and start to build those relationships with their trade partners and with their safety teams from the other companies that they're dealing with, and really start to bring this message to the field. And I think that, if you look at it in a nutshell, is really how we're going to be able to transform the culture of construction hand safety. You know, and then from that, building out posters, building out toolbox talks, providing the right type of imagery on a job site so that your messaging is consistent. You know, providing training to your safety teams. That's something that we can help do. You know, it's not just about stand down week or safety week. Safety shouldn't be limited to 1 week. And I'm going to steal that. I'm going to tell you that was not me. That was one of the safety directors at Turner Construction, who I developed a good friendship with, who he said that line: safety should not be limited to 1 week. It should be a constant evolving growth process that we're constantly taking a look at and trying to, you know, educate ourselves and educate our trade partners and provide a better work environment. And he said, and I'll steal this, there's no competition in safety. I share this information with as many people I come in contact with. And ironically, I've gotten referrals from this guy from his competitors, because he said, as I've told you, there's no competition in safety. So, you know, when you're able to go out there and provide the right information and you can see the results and you're changing that culture, you know, you can build a comprehensive program around that. And I want to thank you for your time today, you know, and for sitting here and, you know, taking this information in and maybe taking a look at something, you know, in a different way. All of the resources that we talked about will be provided, you know, to you in a separate email. But now what I'd like to do is open it up to any questions, and you know, anything that I may or may not have covered that you have a question about, and you know, I can help address that.
Great, thank you, Ian. Always learn something when you speak, so appreciate it. A few questions coming in here. The first one, how can you differentiate between the European and North American standards for PPE?
Oh, that's a great question, Todd. That's actually, ironically, as I mentioned to you guys before we got started, I was on a job site today, and that literal question came up on a job site today. So the ANSI standard versus the European standard. There's a great video on YouTube. You can kind of go and look at it, but in a nutshell, the ANSI standard is different because it is a blade that represents a gash. So it swipes over a glove, the palm of a glove, and the blade is changed on every pass before, you know, and they add more weight to kind of figure out at what level and how many grams to cut it falls into. Essentially, that blade is changed every time because engineered yarns and these gloves use different filaments in them that can cause those blades to dull. The difference with the European standard, it uses a circular blade, think in terms of skill saw, but really more like a pizza cutter type thing on a blade, but they don't change the blade. So if you're constantly using the same blade and you're going at the glove to find out what fail point that's going to be, that blade can dull. So I think you're not really getting a true test of that strength of that glove, because you kind of, where the ANSI standard replaces the blade, it's a fresh blade every time. It's not a dull blade. So that in a nutshell is really the obvious difference. But there are some great YouTube videos. If you go look that up, phenomenal information out there. And I believe our website has information on that as well.
Great, thank you, Ian. Next question. This is a long one. I'll just kind of distill it down best I can. So
Sure.
this person's saying at one of their recent large-scale construction projects, they had multiple subcontractors from different specialties kind of working in close proximity. So for example, one crew was doing welding with a lot of sparks flying around. Another crew nearby was handling materials that were more susceptible to hand injuries. So the question here is, how would your hand safety program kind of address that when you've got people doing such different jobs with different risks so close to each other where they may inadvertently jeopardize someone else's hand safety?
I think the short answer to that is really to put eyes on something like that and go there and look at the different hazards. And what we talk about is, are there ways to build in safety factors using the hierarchy of safety controls? That's how we're looking at it. Whereas I think traditionally it's been, let's look at the glove and not take into account the environmental or behavioral factors. With the hand safety program, we take into account the environmental and behavioral factors. So we're looking at that complete picture and say, okay, is there a better way to build a mousetrap, so to speak? Is there a way we can engineer safety control into this? Is there a way that, not just relying on PPE? And it might come down to, hey, there might be some solutions that might work effectively if we're able to kind of see that. But it can be challenging. It can be challenging for those work sites, because I've been on some very, congested work sites where they have folks working in close proximity. And I think really taking a look at everything from signage to looking at some of the safety factors in there, really looking at the behavioral environmental aspects of it, and not just the PPE. I wouldn't start there. I'd start with an overall view and then work our way down. That's probably the most effective way to do it.
Well said. Next question. This has to do with smartphones and touch screens. So does Superior Glove have any solutions for touch screens? We use several handheld devices requiring the tips of the fingers, and we find that workers often remove their gloves and then injuries occur when they forget to put them back on and they trip, slip, or fall. So
phenomenal question. And that comes up all the time. Yes, we have touchscreen compatible gloves. And that is one of the questions that comes up all the time, because we all know now we're in the digital era. I have yet to go on many job sites and see an actual paper blueprint anymore. It's either on a tablet, a phone, someone's looking at something. So you're right. And the other thing is they lay their gloves down and they walk away because they got to go look at something else that the drawing is taking them to, and they forget where they leave their gloves. So this is a huge discussion I have when I'm doing assessments on a site, is dexterity, tactile touch, but also being able to utilize that technology without having to take those gloves off. We absolutely have that.
Good stuff. Next question has to do with propane, gloves around propane, I guess. So this person here is asking, they said there seems to be a limited option for gloves for the propane industry. Are you guys looking at having more options available?
That is something I'd like to take a deeper dive in as far as the actual hazards itself. Are we talking propane burns? Are we talking lacerations? I think it would warrant a conversation. Short answer, yes. We have 3,000 different SKUs as a company. So we have a glove for just about every hazard out there, including propane. I know we have used in the past on job sites and construction sites where some of the equipment has to use propane, and they're changing out propane tanks using leather gloves with a heat resistant heat resistant feature to that. But the long answer to that is that would be a great question for a follow-up to say, let's talk about those hazards. Which ones are we discussing? What kinds of injuries are you having? And, most likely we do have something that can reduce that.
No, that's great. And that question came from Kim. So Kim, maybe you can drop Ian a note. Ian's email is on the screen here, so that ian.lamfer@superiorglove.com to ask specifically that question. The next one up on the list is, in your opinion, what's the main hazard to hands in construction, and what's the weakest point in construction safety?
Whew, that's a loaded question. What is the main hazard? Well, I think it depends on the trade, number one. But what I see mostly is either lacerations or pinch points. Today in particular, however, I was dealing with a very large demolition company where puncture became the focus. Whereas when you're dealing with other companies, other trades, it could be an impact, a back of hand impact. It could be a heat, a burn, a heat protection. So I think it really depends on the trade, but we always keep coming back to laceration because that really, from my experience, tends to be the one that is causing the most out of work injuries and causing the highest number of reportables. And was there a second part of that question, Todd?
Well, the second question was asking about the weakest point in construction safety.
Well, I think there's so much the weakest point. I think it really kind of going back to the slide that we touched on, is we started to put our program and working with construction together. And as I've gone out there and really not just worked with them, but really gathered information and have been a student myself of this process, I think that slide that talks about how we procure our safety really is the flaw. And I think it comes down to asking the right questions, in the sense that rather than, hey, let me cross over what I'm currently using. Well, you got to ask that question. Why are you crossing over what you're currently using? Is it not working? Or is it a price factor? Or guys not wearing it, girls not wearing it, folks aren't wearing these gloves. What is the reason? And then you back that up a step further is, why are we even using the right glove for the right hazard? And are we taking a deep enough dive to that? And I think that might be the biggest weak point that I see when it comes to that, is that we're just not asking the right questions. We've been doing the same thing that we've been doing for years with better, like it said, with better technology, with more people compliant, yet we're still not seeing the same ratio in the reduction of hand injuries. And I think it's because we're not really taking hazard-centric focus. We're still really basing it on, well, how do I get across over to this glove? Oh, and by the way, can I get it for a cheaper amount? Well, I don't even know if you're using the right glove. I don't know if you're using the right PPE. Has anyone looked at, can we reduce this hazard? Are there are there environmental factors that we can remove to eliminate some injuries? I think taking a holistic, comprehensive approach to that is probably where we haven't been. And I think I'm starting to see that change.
Good stuff. Next question, kind of timely. It's been a hot summer in Canada. It's been a hot summer around the world, really. Pretty much anywhere.
I live in Florida.
Yeah, I believe it. It's a little cooler today. I'm just north of Toronto, a little bit cooler for us today, but still a question that's on a lot of people's minds, which is, gloves for hot work tend to be thicker. That's uncomfortable to many workers. Is there any plan for reducing the thickness while still maintaining the integrity for gloves that are used for hot work?
I think that's kind of like one of those holy grails out there that we're searching for. And I know we're not the only ones. We are constantly moving the envelope on those types of things. But, obviously, much like heat and cold, for that matter, it's creating that barrier from the actual source, whether it be the cold, whether it be the heat. So having those layers and having those pockets of air to reduce that temperature, that's part of it. Kevlar has been, or a para-aramids have been a great tool in that. However, with para-aramids, same way that they use them, growing up, the son of a volunteer firefighter, I know the firefighters always used things that would not be breathable, because we all know you don't want to add air to a fire. So, I think, can we get there? I think as technology improves, I think we can. I think we are already making strides in that direction. But at the end of the day, you're still going to have things that probably won't breathe, because you want to reduce the exposure of the skin to those elements, whether it be cold or whether it be hot, the same way. So, I think, like I said, as technology improves, we're trying to get better. I would have to say, let's take a look at, and this might be a question they can reach out on an individual basis. Let's take a look at, what the tasks currently are, what you're currently doing, and what you're currently using, and that might be a great place to start.
Great, thank you, Ian. Next question. This is another kind of scenario. This one here, they've got a subcontractor crew. Sorry, that's they're used to wearing a particular type of glove. This is for bricklaying, so they're used to wearing this one glove, and they've been resistant to changing to a new, safer glove that's been recommended by the prime contractor. Any thoughts on how to bridge this gap? Does your program help with that? Any advice on that communication to get that subcontractor's buy-in, even if they believe it affects their efficiency?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. In fact, this is one of the main hurdles that I think we faced. And having spent a decade in construction myself, having written specifications, I think this is where the path forward to make these improvements better is the way to go. And I've actually helped some of these large GCs with this type of language. We all know that on a job site, the specification is really, for lack of a better word, the Bible. That's what you follow. That's what, you can't deviate from your spec. If you're going to deviate from the specification, then you have to go through what's called the submittal process. So I think to, be on the front end of that is help, first and foremost, through what we've done with people is through the HSP, identify the hazards, trial the right solutions, got the buy-in for the right solutions to make sure, number one, they work. Now, when those solutions come into play and they want to implement this on their job sites, it's having it in their it's having it in their bid paperwork, having it in their specifications, whereby it's not proprietary. It references, hey, these gloves or this PPE identified in, that's why we built the matrices for some of these large GCs, built that matrix, identified these identified gloves in these matrices provided during the estimation process. When those subcontractors are bidding the jobs, it goes out with the expectations that these are our safety expectations, these are our safety requirements, and here's what we recommend. Any approved alternate must be submitted prior to construction commencement. This way, there's no surprises. So the same way that you have a contractor, let's say, for lack of a better, a roof contractor, a wall contractor that wants to use a different wall panel by a different manufacturer, that wants to use a different fastener for the insulation than what's called out in the spec. It has to go through a submittal process. And what we're doing is working with the safety teams to develop that same type of language for their safety requirements so that there's no surprises. Everyone's on the same page, rather than come back and go, well, you didn't tell us that. That's going to be a change order, or this is what we bought. This is what you're going to have to deal with. So that's how we really work through the step-by-step process. And I actually was a board member for Construction Specification Institute, so I'm very familiar with construction specs. And having these conversations has been like a light bulb going off for a lot of the safety folks, that an approach that they haven't thought of, that we really work and help them with language. Once we get a plan in place that says, hey, we've got the right solution, we've removed the right hazards, we're now, let's just get it to the point where everyone is reading from the same book. I hope that answers that question. It was a long way to get there,
Yeah.
but you know, it is a step-by-step process, and you know, you don't want to try to cut that corner. But that is something, if those companies are wanting to make those changes, I encourage them to reach out, because that's exactly the type of stuff that I do with these larger companies.
No, well said. Next question here. So our last hand injury came from above, this person says. We had a subcontractor who was working at heights and dropped a tool, which resulted in a hand injury to one of our workers below them. So what they said here, the focus is often of our safety program is often on the hands of the person using the tool. Any suggestions on how to address hand safety hazards for workers at ground level or those working below elevated platforms? Kind of a unique injury, but it can happen.
Yeah, and I've seen that. What I have seen in situations like that, first and foremost, any tools usually have to be on a clip, working above, number one. And if you know folks are going to be working above workers down below, having a spotter. That actually ironically came up in a situation today on the demolition site that I was on, where they are going to be ripping stuff down from a shaft, and they're going to have people down below. So you're going to need a spotter available. But those are the types of things that you can build into that, is having someone as a spotter that I've seen be an effective tool to really, you know, because it is hard when somebody's working down low, they're focused on their task, not to get injured doing what they're doing. They can't keep looking up, you know, and I get accidents happen. So I think one successful approach I've seen is having spotters, you know, when those work environments and those tasks are being performed to create those potential hazards.
Great. I think we've got time for one more question. So we'll go with this one. This is, again, a very interesting kind of examples that are being tossed at us today. So we had a situation with a temporary subcontractor who did not know our specific safety protocols for the site. They sustained a hand injury on their first day before anyone else showed up to the site. So the question here is how can the hand safety program be quickly and effectively communicated to short-term subcontractors to ensure immediate compliance?
Well, I think every subcontractor is going to get a copy of a spec and a safety plan, I would assume. I mean, that's required whenever I've been on a site. If you're able to build that language into the spec, and you have a customized, or you have a matrix that's been something you've designed to your standards, that they know which types of PPE are applicable, are required, are approved per their trade, then that should be able to be communicated. The other thing that I've seen folks do is, before they step onto a job site, I know a lot of the partners that I've worked with, and we've been brought into this, orientation. They do a job site orientation before anyone's even allowed to step foot on their job site, even if it's a 20-minute orientation on, this is what's going on, these are the hazards, you know, these are the other trades working. That's a very important thing, is communicating what other trades are going to be working around them, so that they know what potential hazards are, and then what the expectations are. So having an orientation program is a good place to start. Having you know, language in your documentation that they get even during the estimating process, before they even, you know, while they're bidding that job to do the work, so that they know what's expected. And that, again, it goes back to what we're talking about with a hand safety program, and then, you know, a trial and process, and developing standards, and then communicating that through a matrix that goes out with specification language. it really is kind of a step-by-step process that everyone, whether it be here, Canada, even in Mexico, because I do have been on sites in Mexico, they go through a bidding process. They go through a process where, hey, I'm going to estimate this job so that I can see if I can get it. Well, I'm going to get a copy of the specs from the general contractor on what tasks or what job we're going to be performing, what's expected as far as, the standards of work or what's the jobs to be performed. Within that should be your safety language, should be your safety communication, should be a copy of the matrix so that they know, hey, this is what's expected on our job site. You want an approved alternate? That needs to be submitted during the submittal process before you step foot on our job site. Because they're right, they own that job site, they own that liability. They should be the ones setting the expectations for what's to be, worn, what's to be enforced, what's to be complied with on the site.
Great, thank you, Ian. We are out of time. We're at the top of the hour now. So I want to say thanks, Ian, on behalf of OHS Canada. Thanks so much for taking your time today to share your expertise with our readers. To those in attendance, as a reminder, you will receive a link to this recording via email within the next 48 hours or so, directly from Superior Glove. So keep an eye out for that. And once again, on behalf of Superior Glove and OHS Canada, I'd like to thank you, and we wish you a safe rest of your day.